I'm going to show you something, and I want you to think of a word that associates with it. You ready? Here we go. Right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now looking at that, you might have thought of a variety of different words, but one thing that won't have come to your head, if I've done this well, is fantasy. Now, why is that? Well, I think that's because what you're looking at, despite being a fantasy world, is in no way resembling any traditional fantasy tropes that you're used to. Gone are the avid grasslands and forests and great noble kingdoms that you're used to. Instead, in Russia, the world in which the Stormlight Archive is set in, a colossal worldwide storm called the Great Storm ravages the world every week or so. And this one change that Brandon Sanderson has made fundamentally changes the entire planet, from the way people live to fauna, flora. What do I mean by that? People live in slanted houses to survive the storms, so their houses don't come down on them. The grass itself retracts into the ground as people step near it. Instead of dogs and cats and rats, you have virtually every creature on this planet chitinous, crab-like. From the smallest of animals, less than the size of the palm of your hand, all the way up to colossal Godzilla-like beasts called grey shells. Even humanoids with intelligence matching humans exist in this world, and yes, they too are chitinous. What is interesting is when, not what he does differently, but when Brandon Sanderson chooses to use something that we are used to, such as regular grass or horses. This is actually a fundamental part of the world building because of the history behind why there are certain creatures such as humans and certain creatures such as the Parshendi, who are crab-like humanoids on this planet. And I won't go into why that's there. But viewing this world for even just a few pages, you're able to see the rich depth that is on show. As I'm sure you'll know, if you've viewed anything on my channel, I'm a bit of a Sanderson fan, and one thing he does best is his magic. And this book does not fail on that. In fact, in the first 2 prologues, of which there are 3, yes, this isn't a 1,000-page book, there are 3 prologues. In the first 2 prologues, you get a glimpse of the magic in this world. In fact, a small bit in the 3rd as well. You see, unlike traditional fantasy books, where the magic might revolve around fireballs or lightning or something quite generic, the magic in this world revolves around magic suits of armor and swords, which grant super strength and can cut through anything. On top of that, there are special magical powers, but they don't come from oneself, but they're fueled by the very light that the storm brings, filling the gemstones that people use as currency. And I won't go into the exact specifics of what the magic is, but there are 10 different kinds of people who can use the magic, each with their own unique sets of powers. One main ones we see is windrunners, people who can walk on walls or even fly. One change of giving someone the ability to walk on walls fundamentally changes the writing in a way that's far more interesting. Seeing someone having to fight someone who can walk on the walls or on the ceiling, seeing someone who can heal themselves just by sucking in air, seeing someone who can create illusions with light. All very interesting powers, all of which are on show, and each of these is used in a way to further the story. None of these are used as gimmicks to just make the characters and the protagonists and the antagonists more interesting because they can do cool stuff, the things they are able to do fundamentally change the story and the way the characters view the story, which I think makes for some really great prose. One thing I would say is, with this being an 1,000-page book and the smallest of the currently 4 existing books of the Stormlight Archive, there is a lot of world building. Now, Sanderson has actually gone in an interview and said that traditionally he wouldn't have made the world building as heavy as he did, but he did because, as an already well-established author, he had a fan base. He had people who had the trust in his writing style. So one thing to consider that I would say reviewing this book is that there are times when, as a first-time reader, it can feel very slow. It can feel a bit of a drain to get through certain chapters, especially if you're not invested in certain characters. But it's all worth it. Sanderson is one of the most well-regarded writers in fantasy at the moment, and the Stormlight Archive is really his magnum opus as of yet. So I would highly recommend it, but as I would say, it may be worth trying something such as Warbreaker, Final Empire or Elantris first to get a taste of what his writing style is like before you dive deep into his heaviest, most expansive world. Speaking of the expansive world, the world is only as interesting as the characters that inhabit it, and the Stormlight Archive, thankfully, has some of the best written, most interesting characters I've ever read. Now, you can't review the Stormlight Archive without talking about one man in particular, Paladin the Stormblessed. My favourite character in fiction. Paladin starts off the story in his very first scene as a valiant hero, the Paladin that his name rhymes with, who saves everyone and is the most incredible spearsman in the world, only to fall to abject misery as far down as someone can fall. And we see him at his absolute worst in the very next chapter. We see a man who once was so incredible, who is now fallen into the worst situation possible, but who tries anyways, despite being in absolute misery, to push forward and to try and bring the squad together, even when their job is essentially slaves who must run headfirst at archers carrying a shield, so that the soldiers can jump over the cracks in between the land in which they're fighting. Now, that might sound a bit crazy, a bit strange, definitely not something you're used to. You'll understand why as you read more. But what's really inspiring about Paladin is seeing him try when he is depressed, when he knows that he will lose people, but unifying people anyways through his bravery, through his determination, through his compassion. One thing that is very interesting about the Stormlight Archive is that each book you focus on a different character. So you get all the different characters involved in the plot, and you have different parts as the story goes on. But there's always one section, there's always one character who is present in all of the sections, who you actually get a second story alongside them in the past, viewing their backstory, seeing what led them to be the person they were when you first saw them. With Paladin, that's seeing his trauma as a child, his love for his brother, and his difficult relationship with his father, who clearly has different ideas for him to what Paladin wants. We see Paladin struggling with his racial and social standing. As he is someone with dark eyes, he is considered lesser than the people in the world who have blue eyes, purple eyes, green eyes. And we see that Paladin, being put into slavery by these light eyes, develops great prejudice against them. It's really interesting dialogue because he is a paladin, and yet he is also a grimy, smelly slave who hates the aristocrats that have wronged him. And yet, unlike Kelsier in the Mistborn series, Paladin eventually chooses to help them anyways because it is the right thing to do. He doesn't kill because of hate, but because it's the right thing to do. And that is something that I think makes him truly inspiring. We also have a variety of other very interesting characters. We have Shallan, who has her own interesting storyline as a thief, trying to steal from the most incredible women in the world, whilst studying under her tutelage and developing mysterious powers involved with her drawing. We see Dalinar, a great war leader, an uncle of the king of Alethkar, this military society that has notes from anything from Mongolia to the Huns to the Romans, all in one. We see a man who once lost his brother because he wasn't being honourable, and we see a man trying with everything he can to be honourable in a society where guile and deceit get you just as far, if not further, than honour and being respectful. We see his battle with one of the primary antagonists, Sadius, who is everything wrong with the society they live in, whereas Dalinar can be viewed as everything right. Two sides of the same coin, two equal powers fighting against each other for control. But what is great about the plot in this book is that whilst Shallan's is somewhat detached from the rest, Dalinar's and his sons Adolin and Renarin's story is inherently linked with Haldin as they're part of the same war. And at times when you might see a win for Dalinar and Adolin, the effect it has on Sadius may actually be a lose for Kaladin, who now has to run far more often into the arrows, into death. This creates dynamic storytelling because there isn't just any one action that feels fundamentally great. There are always consequences, there are always grey areas that make what is happening gripping and confusing. There's also a variety of other characters in this book who aren't main characters. Every part of this book, the book is split into 5 parts, you get a break. And then you spend a few chapters viewing a character you haven't really gotten to know much, who is somewhere else in the world. This gives a lot deeper world building because you see a variety of different settings, you see different characters, and if you understand the Cosmere, if you understand what is going on, which makes these especially good on a reread, you can see what is going on behind the scenes. You can see teasers of things happening. Travellers from other worlds, from other books, arriving on the planet seeking someone. A strange man going around and assassinating people, developing magical powers. You see someone travelling to the far west, where instead of rocks and slime, the thick mountainous passes that have weathered most of the Great Storm have led to fauna much more similar to Earth, with grass that doesn't move, trees that stay still. I think a lot of this book, one of the main criticisms I always give, as I've said, is that it can be very long and tough on the first read. And it is about having that faith in Sanderson to deliver something absolutely incredible towards the end of the book. And something I can say is once you've come to understand this world, once you've come to understand these characters and what their goals truly are, well then you've got 3.5 books of the best writing you'll ever read. But it's not just 3.5 regular books, it's 3.5 of the biggest books you'll also ever read. Rhythm of War, his most recent Stormlight Archive book, is 440,000 words. To put that into context, that's about the length of all 3 Hunger Game books. And then 50% on top of that. yes, you're effectively getting 4 books per book, depending on how much prose you're used to. Certainly worth your money, that's for sure. I think another criticism I would maybe give, and I think this isn't necessarily a criticism, but it applies to any large fantasy book, is that when you've got an expansive cast of characters, you're always going to love one more than certain others. As I mentioned, Paladin is my favourite character of all time. I'm considering a tattoo relating to him at some point. But I wasn't necessarily involved in the minor characters in the heartbreaks as much. I wasn't involved in Charlotte's story as much, which was split up. It wasn't in every part. And because of that, I felt that often I would be reading a chapter and I would just be thinking, I want to get back to the Paladin, I want to get to Dalna, I want to get to the chapter I care about. You know, sometimes when you're reading Paladin's backstory, it's difficult going from a man running head first into 1,000 arrows and somehow surviving, to then him being a boy and his brother finding a cool rock. You know, it is great storytelling, it's very emotional, but it can feel a bit at times that you just want to get to the meat. Now, the prose is brilliant, but that isn't what Sanderson is known for. He's known for brilliant world building, excellent characters, plots that cascade into this magnificent chaos towards the end, as every arc, every character is coming together and you are gripping the last 150 pages or so like your life depends on it. Something else I don't get from any other books personally is what I've taken from it. This book has impacted me quite emotionally. The series has changed who I am, has given me inspiration, and has given me perspective on how strong humans are in the face of horrible circumstances. Something that I found really helpful in the times where I've been going through very horrible times in the past year or two. So just for that reason alone, I'd recommend giving it a try, because if you take even a tiny bit from it that I did, well then hopefully that might benefit your life quite a lot. Now I know I may be biased. I mean, this book was what actually inspired me to become an author. It's very important to me. So perhaps I'm a bit biased, but I think that speaks for itself, that this was the book to inspire me to become an author. And I hope reading it ignites a passion in you as well. Thank you for watching. If you like this, I'd really appreciate a subscribe or a like. Share it with someone you think would enjoy it. But until next time, until I'm able to commit something half decent again, you have a lovely day, and I'll see you next week.